Book of Beginnings, Lesson 22. Jacob returned to the Promised Land. Part of what, sometimes when you do a study like this, it can feel like you're bogged down because I want it to be an in-depth study. So when we finish with the book of Genesis, if you don't know the book of Genesis, it's your own fault. It's not mine, but sometimes it's not exciting material as much as material that we need to know. And in order for us on Sunday mornings, I've been talking a lot about making disciples. In order for us to be discipled, we need to learn. So we're on the Jacob, going through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and now we're where he's returning from the land of Haran to the Promised Land. Now Jacob heard that Laban's sons were saying, Jacob has taken all that was our father's and has built this wealth from what belonged to our father. And Jacob saw from Laban's face that his attitude toward him was not the same. Then the Lord said to him, go back to the land of your fathers and to your family, and I will be with you. So how long has Jacob been in Haran with Laban? He's been there for 20 years. He was there 14 years, 7 years for each daughter, and then another 6 years after that to earn the wages that he had presented to Laban so he could have something of his own. So the question I want to start with is, how did Laban and his sons view Jacob? And I've given us some things to look at there. Family, friend, acquaintance, or servant. How did he really see him? And we'll go back to what the scripture we just read, and 3 points. Jacob has, they said, this is his Laban's sons. Jacob has taken all that our father has built, this wealth from what belonged to our father. In other words, he said, it was our father's. Jacob has taken it, and he's built his wealth from taking stuff from our father. So basically, it doesn't sound like they think he's part of the family. Jacob saw Laban's face and attitude toward him was not the same. So,
but Jacob was not given any wages at all. He just worked
his first 7 years, he said he worked 7 years for Rachel. That's all the wages he put. So he's basically working for Laban. And so his wages was a wife. And he didn't know he had to work 14 years and get 2 wives out of the deal. So he got more than he bargained for. So there was no last week when we were talking about it, a week before, or last time or the time before, we were talking about the wages, that he had established the wages, and that his wages would be the streaked or spotted and sheep and goats and so on. He would separate them out, and that's what he would take. And Laban even tried to cheat him out of that. So Jacob now has a choice. He can remain there and stay as a servant, because that's basically what he was, or he could strike out on his own. And if he stayed there, he'd be treated like a servant. You can tell that from what Laban's sons were saying, that none of this belongs to Jacob. This is all of ours. And so I would be a little jumpy too if they were talking like that and I was there, because there's no telling what they do. So you don't have to answer this question, but who was Jacob? Because who he was has a lot to do with what we're going to be talking about and why it's important. So who was Jacob? Jacob, in Genesis 31:3, it says, then the Lord said, this is the last part of that, go back to the land of your fathers and to your family, and I will be with you. So now the Lord spoke to him. He told him to go back to the land of his fathers. So it's not just a matter now of Jacob making up his mind of what he wants to do. God had told him, it's time for you to go back to the land of your fathers, and it's important that he do that. And he says, to your family, and I will be with you. That's a pretty good promise. He said, I will be with you, sir. Why is it important that he returns to this land? And we'll go back to Genesis 15:18. On that day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, I give this land to your offspring from the brook of Egypt to the Euphrates River. the land of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, Hittites, Perizzites, Rephaim, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, and the Jebusites. He's given all this land to his inheritance for his offspring. So, let's look at a couple of maps. And one here, I don't want to trip over that. That would not make a good video. And it has the scripture here in Genesis and then down here in Deuteronomy. And it names these people. It says the land of the Kenites, Kenizzites, Cadmonites, and all of these. And if you look at this map, it gives you some of these names. It doesn't have all of them. I've got a couple of maps here. And you can see these Hittites and Hivites and this says Gergesenes, but it's the Gergesites that live there. Canaanites here and here. Perizzites, the Hivites, the Jebusites, the Philistines, which it doesn't mention over there. The Hittites, the Amorites, the Moabites, and the Amorites up here, and then Edomites down here. So this is the area that we're talking. This is the Sea of Galilee, the Jordan River, and the Dead Sea. The Salt Sea is what it says there. And this second verse here is from Deuteronomy 7:1. It says, when the Lord your God brings you into the land you are entering to possess, and drives out before you many nations, Hittites, Girgashites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites, 7 nations larger and stronger than you. So he mentions 7 nations. Well, if you go by these, this is more than 7. Up here, there's, I think, 10 of those. And he's talking about, there. By the time he got to Deuteronomy, they're talking about 7. So, here's the 7 nations that he's talking about. The Hivites, the Girgasites, the Canaanites, the Amorites, the Jebusites, the Perizzites, and the Hittites. Why is there only 7 when there was 10 when he promised the land to Abram, who became Abraham? Why is there 7? Now, to answer that question, how many years was it from the time that he made this promise to Abraham until the children of Israel under Moses and then Joshua returned to the promised land? How many years was it? Over 400 years. So that was a long time. Things change in 400 years. Think about it like, well, you go back to the time of Abraham, you're talking about 500 years. 500 years from the time of Abraham until the time that we're talking about when Joshua came back over and led the children of Israel there. It's been 500 years. So 500 years ago, what was right here? 500 years ago, was there Richlands, Beulahville, Pink Hill, Jacksonville? There's none of that. There was not even any English settlement here 500 years ago. You go back to the first successful English settlement, or say the first settlement was Jamestown, but really the first really successful one was Plymouth at 1620. So in 1620 is when they had the first English settlement. There was still nothing down here. There were no towns. There were no cities up there. There were no towns up there. Boston was out there. None of the towns that are there now are there. It was a totally different place. You even go back 200 years. For that matter, in my lifetime, how much have things changed? In your lifetime, Geneva, how much have things changed since? You're a little older than I am, but not a lot. But things have changed. What it was like when I was a boy here and what it's like now. There's no, just like us coming out here tonight. Bumper to bumper traffic all the way down Gun Branch Road, both directions, meeting us and going back the other way. Even turn on the Northwest Bridge Road is where we cut across, and there still was traffic out there. And when I was dating Diana and we first got married, that's the way I would go to her house. I could drive all the way from home to her house and not see 3 cars. And it's, yes, I remember the road up to the loop road was all dirt road and what. Yeah, there was all this around here was a dirt road. Everything, population has grown and the cities have grown. So things have changed in my lifetime. Just think about how much things have changed in 500 years. And that's what we're talking about here. So that's the reason there was only 7 nations to talk about there. Now, this is another view, and it gives you it expands out a little bit. And there's a reason I want to look at this particular map is because down here, the one we're just looking at, here is the Sea of Galilee, and here's the Dead Sea. Okay, so this is the area that we were just looking at that other map here, and the other one up here is that small area there is what we're talking about, is right down here about where this square is, or this rectangle is, and it gives the Hittites, Canaanites, Ammonites, and all these. And down at the bottom it says unlocated on the map. So the Kenizzites, the Rephaites, and the Girgashites, they're not really sure where they were because that was a long time ago. So we wouldn't know. But there's something interesting here. It has a red line up here. This red line here is not as significant, but this one is. This is the Euphrates River. This is the Tigris River. This is Mesopotamia, which means between the rivers, and it's between the Tigris and Euphrates. This is important here for what we're going to be talking about tonight because of Jacob. And you see the area that we're talking about down here south of the Euphrates River. So now let's look at a couple more maps. This was the one that I showed the last time, and it shows over here in Beersheba, down by the Dead Sea, is where Jacob left, and he traveled all the way up here to Haran, and that's where he met Laban and Rachel and all them. This is the Euphrates River. So what do you notice? Haran is on the other side of the Euphrates River. And south of that is where he came from. He traveled all these miles, 500-600 miles, whatever it is. He came up this way. And this line shows when he came back, and he came this way and across the Jordan back over into Shechem, where Bethel is, and so on. This one is roughly, and it depends on who you follow on this, Abraham was promised a section of land. And if you look at the description of the land that was promised to him, it says from the brook of Egypt, the Nile's down here, the brook of Egypt here, which is north of the Red Sea, the brook of Egypt to the Euphrates River. And up here, there's Haran up there. So what's the first thing that we notice is that if Jacob could not have stayed there and fulfilled the birthright and fulfilled the covenant because he was not even on the land that was promised to his grandfather, which is here. And that's the reason it's important that he leave Laban's household and go back to the promised land, is because he's carrying the birthright and he has to fulfill what God has promised to Abraham in order to fulfill the covenant. And I'm glad that he did fulfill the covenant, because otherwise Jesus wouldn't have come and we would have been a mess. So anyway, this gives you an idea there. This map gives you, this shows you some highlights of Jacob's life, each one of these stars. This is where he was born. This is at Bethel, where he slept and he saw the ladder down from heaven. Over here is where, coming back, Jacob wrestled with God. And up here is Haran, where he marries Leah and Rachel. And you can see it is past the Euphrates River. So he was Abraham traveled a good bit. Jacob traveled a lot. But Isaac didn't travel much from the land that he was on. That has nothing to do with our lesson tonight, but it's just I thought, an interesting thing. But you can see from this that he has to get back over at least on this side of the Euphrates to be on the land that was promised to Abraham. Well, down here is where he came from, was down here in Beersheba. So he's coming back and coming back home. And I put down here in Laban's house, he was living outside of the covenant lands. So if the descendants of Abraham were going to inherit this land, then Jacob, who's a descendant of Abraham, grandson of Abraham, he had to wind up back down here south in this particular area. And I put it just to something to think about. If Laban had treated Jacob nice, would he have stayed there? Probably. But he didn't. Got to where he and his sons were not treating Jacob very nice. And that's something that enticed him to go, besides the fact that God told him to go. And what did God tell him? I'll be with you. Did Jacob believe he'd be with him? If the land was part of the covenant made with Abraham and his descendants, could Jacob have continued the covenant outside the boundaries of the covenant? And the answer is no. He had to get back to where he was. And how many miles was it? About 500-600 miles is where he was. That's a long way to travel. When he traveled north from Beersheba to Haran, what did he have to carry with him? Him and a staff. That was it. Now he's coming back that same distance. What does he have? He has cows and sheep and goats and wives and kids, and I mean, he has loads. He had all 11 of his sons were already born, because it's when he got to Bethel is where Benjamin was born. That's a long way to walk. That's a long way to travel with all the stuff that you have to travel with. So you can see where, if I were Jacob, I might have said, Lord, can I just get across the Euphrates a few miles and we'll settle down. We'll settle down over here. I don't have to go all the way back here, do I? But throughout the Bible, God made promises to people in each case. They had to do something. God makes promises to us, but we have to do something. You look at this, is maybe off, not on the subject, maybe it is. You look at these beautiful scenery of these mountain peaks with snow, and you see these scenes where snow and the trees hanging with icicles and all, and it looks so beautiful. What if you were out there and didn't have something to keep you warm? That beautiful place would kill you. If you will go anywhere without getting up and doing something, you'll die. You'll starve to death. You have to do something. No matter, God gives us provisions, but if we don't do something to take those provisions, so something is required. Something has to be done. So, just as a matter of review, what was required of Abraham? Leave his home, shed blood, shed his own blood, and sacrifice his son. That was the 4 specific things that Abraham was commanded to do by God in order to ratify the covenant that God made with him. God made these promises. Of course, Abraham got the better end of the bargain. If you're making a deal, if I was going to make a covenant, a contract agreement with Elon Musk, and we were going to split up everything evenly, who would come out on top? So when you're negotiating with, making a contract with somebody that's much more powerful and richer than you, you're going to come out on the better end of it. So Abraham came out on the better end of it, although at times he might not have thought so. At a minimum, what would be required of his descendants for him to ratify the covenant? Genesis 31:4. Jacob had Rachel and Leah called to the field where his flocks were. He said to them, I can see from your father's face that his attitude towards me is not the same, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that I've worked hard for your father, and that he has cheated me and had changed my wages 10 times, but God has not let him harm me. If he said the spotted sheep will be your wages, then all the sheep were born spotted. If he said the streaked sheep will be your wages, then all the sheep were born streaked. God has taken away your father's herds and given them to me. So God, although Laban was trying to cheat Jacob at every turn, God was blessing Jacob even in the midst of all of it. That's good news for us. 31:14. Then Rachel and Leah answered him, do we have any portion or inheritance in our father's household? Are we not regarded by him as outsiders? For he has sold us. He has sold. Now think about it. How would you feel, Diana, if your dad sold you to me? For he has sold us and has certainly spent our money. In other words, he sold us and he spent everything that was ours. In fact, all the wealth that God has taken away from our father belonged to us and to our children. So do whatever God has said to you. So they're saying, Rachel and Leah both saying, it is fine with us. We'll do whatever you want to do. You follow. Verse 16. We were finished with verse 16. And we'll skip right on down to Genesis 31, 36, because all that in between is what they did. They got up to leave, and then Laban came after them and all this kind of stuff. So in 36th verse, then Jacob became incensed because of Laban, because of what Laban said, and brought charges against Laban. What is my crime, he said to Laban. What is my sin that you have pursued me? What have I done? What have I done that caused you to be like this towards me? Biggest thing was he didn't want to lose Jacob because he knew he was blessed because of Jacob, and he was wealthy because of him. 32 verse 1. Jacob went on his way, and God's angel met him. So God's angel met him. God's angels, plural, met him. Okay, so Jacob, God told him to go back to the land of his fathers. He said, I will be with you. Jacob heads out on the trek to go back, and he runs into some of God's angels on the way. You think he should be getting the idea that God's going to take care of me? I don't have to worry about this. It'll be taken care of. He said, this is God's camp. So he called the place Mahanaim, which means two camps. 32 verse 3. Jacob sent messengers ahead of him to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. He commanded them, you are to say to my lord Esau, this is what your servant Jacob says. I have been staying with Laban and have been delayed until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, male and female slaves. I have sent this message to inform my lord in order to seek your favor. He's still afraid of Esau, although that God told him he's going to be with him and sent angels to reinforce it and tell him, look, you're going to be taken care of, but he's still trying to work things out. That's the way we are, isn't it? Verse 6, when the messenger returned to Jacob, now listen, you love, this is good. When the messengers returned to Jacob, they said, we went to your brother Esau. He is coming to meet you, and he has 400 men with him. What do you think Jacob was thinking? He said, I'm in trouble. But what did God tell him? I'll be with you. And he sent angels to reinforce it. Then Jacob said, this is verse 9, God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, the Lord who said to me, go back to your land and to your family, and I will cause you to prosper. I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness you have shown your servant. Indeed, I crossed over this Jordan with my staff, and now I have become two camps. So he's saying, when I went across the Euphrates, it's just me and my walking stick is all it was, and now I have all kinds of stuff. Even it had to split it up into two camps. And he says, please, praying to God, please rescue me from the hand of my brother Esau, for I'm afraid of him. I'm afraid of him. Now, who would you... If God said he's going to be with you and he sends angels to reinforce it, why would you still be afraid of a man? One man. Because we're human. For I am afraid of him. Otherwise, he may come and attack me, the mothers and their children. You have said, I will cause you to prosper. I will make your offspring like the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted. He says, he was praying that God would rescue him. God already told him he would. His actions indicate that he did not totally trust God, but he was delivered. What did he do? Even after all this, now he sends ahead, if you remember the story, he sends some of his people ahead, along with some of the livestock ahead to meet Esau. And then he sends another group and sends another, because he didn't want them all to be killed at one time. 32:24. He had already sent everybody ahead, and it was just Jacob. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. Says a man wrestled with him. When the man saw that he could not defeat him. Okay, who was this man? What was this man? Was it an angel? Was it? Don't know. All I know is he was wrestling with this man. He said he struck Jacob's hip socket as they wrestled and dislocated his hip. Then he said to Jacob, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." He was not a vampire, so he wasn't concerned about but so you can take that off your list. But Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. What is your name? The man asked. Jacob replied. It's a question. I said, who was this man? What was this man? And we're not really, it doesn't tell us. It doesn't tell us enough. It doesn't give us enough information. But I'm quite sure that the guy knew who Jacob was. Especially if he was an angel, if he was sent from God, he knew who Jacob was. But he asked Jacob, he said, what is your name? The man asked. Jacob replied, he said, your name will no longer be Jacob, he said. It will be Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed. Now put there, do you think the man, angel, being, whatever he was, you think he'd have had any problem defeating Jacob if he'd wanted to? But he wrestled with him all night. What was the point then? What was the point he was trying to get at with all this? Why did the man ask Jacob what his name was? What does Jacob mean? It says your name no longer will be supplanter. That's what Jacob means. Your name will be wrestled with God and prevails. How we see ourselves is how we are. If we see ourselves as a failure, most likely we'll be failures. If we see ourselves as children of God, it's different than if we see ourselves as children of man. If my father is God, it makes a difference. And how Jacob saw himself would affect the rest of his life. And God knew this, so he had his name changed to something besides supplanter. Supplanter means you'll replace somebody. You'll be a replacement. Which is better, to have your name be replacement or have your name be wrestled with God and prevailed? Wrestled with God and man and prevailed. Which one would be better? How you identify yourself affects your life. Same thing there. It's a common quote. And I'm not, if you use this quote, I have no problem with it, but you won't hear me say this. I am a sinner saved by grace. We'll say, I am a sinner saved by grace. What did you just identify yourself as? Okay. I prefer, I was a sinner and now I'm saved by grace. Am I still a sinner? No, that's not my identity. Do I still have a problem with sin? Yes. But that's not my identity. My problem with that statement is you're identifying as a sinner. I am the redeemed of God. I am the righteousness of God. That's my identity. And if I identify like that, it makes me more successful in life, and it will with all of us. I was a sinner, and now I'm saved by grace. Regardless of how much we struggle with sin, so God was taking Jacob and changes his name from supplanter, from a replacement, from one that replaces, to, or wrestled with God and man and prevailed. That's pretty good to go. So when people, just like, remember when we talked about when it was Abram and he changed his name to Abraham. And Abraham means a father of a multitude or a father of many nations, depending on how you want to look at it. And how many children did he have at that time when he did that? He had one. He had Ishmael. Didn't even have Isaac at that time. But everywhere he went, no matter where he went, they said, And who are you? He said, I'm the father of a multitude. And they look around and said, where the multitude? So here's Jacob everywhere he goes. Instead of when people say, and I say, my name's Randy, and he says, my name is wrestles with God and prevails. That'll help you succeed. Jacob was tasked with carrying the birthright, the covenant made with Abraham. Just as God changed Abraham's identity, he's also changed Jacob's identity. Why is that important? It's so that he could identify as something that would help him to be successful in carrying the birthright down to the next generation. So, questions and answers. You have questions, we have answers.